Hi, my name is Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Worker Being Podcast.
Today, we are lucky to be joined by Joel Heath. He is the founder of FluidStance, and we're really excited to talk to him today to learn more about the mission of FluidStance and all of the research that's been done behind it. So we're really going to be focusing in on that today. So hi, welcome, Joel.
Thank you very much. I appreciate for you guys having me on today. It's exciting.
We're excited to have you. We would love for you to introduce yourself. So to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you came from, and what motivated you to create FluidStance.
Oh man, that's always a loaded question. But my name's Joel Heath, and I think I've dedicated most of my career to graying the lines between work and play. Right out of school, wanted to get into ski area management, which was pretty untraditional, and my dad wasn't all that excited about it. But had the opportunity to get to Vail and make a road. This is back before ski areas were publicly traded back in the 90s. And you only got into management through ski school or ski patrol. So went through the ski academy, got hired as a ski instructor. And right after graduating, moved to Vail, Colorado, and took an internship, and only lasted in that internship for 2 days, and ended up getting a job offer working on the summer side of the product. So really never went into actual ski school itself, but really just started to understand what the dynamics of a ski resort is and how that balance between winter and summer looks. But more than anything, I just really started to find that sweet spot between pursuing something I love, but more importantly, being in a place that I love and also doing great work. So Vail really became kind of that nice spot for me, and had the opportunity to build an event, which became the largest outdoor adventure event in the world. It's called the Mountain Games, now the GoPro Mountain Games, and had a lot of fun just putting athletes on a platform and kind of mixing that fine line between the best athletes in the world and your average Joe, and putting them on the start line. And just really had a lot of fun doing that, but delivering a great product. But had the opportunity to sell that event in 2008, and part of my sale was contingent upon my title sponsor coming with it. And they joked at the time, we'll sign this, but you're going to have to come work inside for us. And we all joked, but 2 weeks after that, they actually said, yeah, we really do want you to come inside. So I came inside the company Deckers Outdoor Corporation, which owns a lot of great brands, including Teva, which is the brand that I was a part of. Ugg boots, Sanuk, Hoka, a lot of great brands, but helped Teva turn around and really be authentic to who they were. But it was at that space. I had gone from, playing and working my butt off. I was skiing or mountain biking 68 days a year. And all of a sudden, ironically, inside an adventure brand, I was sitting in a conference room or at my desk 60 hours a week, and just started to lose my mojo, and really just didn't start to feel like I was when I was mixing play. I mean, it was common for us to have a staff meeting on the chairlift, and then all of a sudden I'm sitting in conference rooms more than I ever pleased. So I started to try to figure out how you can create movement in your workplace, but still get your job done. And that's really where the first inkling of FluidStance started to begin, and really started to have some fun with some ideas on how work doesn't have to be done in a traditional manner. And since then, that was 2009. I've really started dedicating myself to making sure that play is still an important part, but what I would term as productive play. And that's really where we got to FluidStance.
That's awesome. I like the story of your trajectory through what, are some more non-traditional jobs, but also, with some really great, background in some really generalizable skills that you've been able to use in a lot of different ways. And I appreciate your passion for, doing things that you find enjoyable and fun, and some wellness focus in there too. By the way, the Sanuk yoga mat sandals are literally like the only thing I wear all summer long. I'm obsessed with them. So
I love them too.
Yeah, they're like the best shoe in the world. So anyway, so that excited me. But I would love to hear a little bit more about what FluidStance does, and what you all are working on right now, so that our listeners could get a better sense of how the company is growing and what you're intending to do with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's ironic, but my first real desk job, right, was almost 15 years into my working career, and I started to feel the pain that everybody was experiencing, and sitting at a desk and in that conference room, and 100,000 miles on an airplane every year, like just things started to shorten up. My hip flexors, my posture started to get awfully disgusting, and started to look at ways that we could create that movement and make movement to matter. But most importantly, started to look at how you can maintain productivity. So, like so many others, I went to a standing desk. This was pretty early in the standing desk world, and I loved it. But I figured out that I had just moved the pain from my backside all of a sudden to my knees, my feet, and my hips. And anybody that's worked retail understands standing is really hard. And so I quickly discovered that standing wasn't the silver bullet. And I didn't think sitting was the antichrist either. And so I started to look around, and obviously movement really made a lot of sense. And I can tell you, I was sitting at a restaurant all by myself, just thinking, do I pursue this idea or not? And I looked across the street, and there was this group of 5 moms that were all sitting having coffee, and they all had newborns, and every one of them was just rocking back and forth, just with a little subtle just rock in the day. And it just made a lot of sense to me. It's like, hey, why is rocking reserved for the littlest of us? And this cubicle is very much like other places in our life. I need movement too. And so I set out on a trajectory to look at how that movement could be created, and started playing with 27 different prototypes in my garage, trying to find enough movement to matter, but not too much to distract. And we kind of set this threshold saying, okay, we have to increase our energy expenditure by at least 10%, but we need to make sure we have less than a 1% impact on productivity, meaning, and we utilize keystroke productivity as that threshold to decide whether we are in the right or wrong. And so that's where we tried to look at, okay, treadmill desks are awesome, but a lot of distraction comes with that kind of movement. And then sitting is great when you need a rest, but it's not great for all day long. And so we wanted to try to find that sweet spot, and started to play with different things. We quickly discovered with the doctor that we were working with that certain geometry was overstretching the calf and the Achilles for all day use. And so we needed to try to limit that to 16 degrees, where that's where our utility patent is our product limits how much stretch you get in your calf and Achilles. So it is a product that could be utilized all day long as well. And so Fluid Stance is really that physical manifestation of the movement that I saw in a lot of new moms, almost 5 years ago, that really put me over the top.
That's such an interesting idea, though, looking at new moms. I would never have thought that would lead you to where you went, because Katina and I both were lucky enough to have one of your boards or decks, and we really, really enjoy them. It makes sense now that you say the new moms, but I would never have thought of that. So that's so interesting to me.
It's completely selfish, for me. Is I couldn't stand still anymore, and anybody that's been in a meeting with me knows that I tend to have a hard time and really just prefer to have movement in my life. So movement's medicine. You hear a lot, and I believe that the brain follows what the body's doing, and so whether it's looking at new moms, or I even looked at my first child who was starting kindergarten, and he had a life of play for the first 5 years of his life. And then all of a sudden this day in kindergarten, we throw him on a mat on a Monday, and he's supposed to sit in the square. And if he can't sit in the square, there's something wrong with him. It just doesn't make sense. And so this movement that we're up to is really about just getting us back to what feels natural and what is natural for all of us. And it's not sitting all the time. It's not standing all the time. And it's not moving all the time. It's that moderation is the ultimate formula, in my opinion. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to preach, is that there's a time to sit, a time to stand, and a time to move.
Yeah, balance is key, isn't everything else?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because some of the most I'm really and have been throughout my life really into dance, and some of them, like, ancient, like, tribal dances that people do were based on just movements that they got from nature, and they were really nourishing to people and provided really good exercise to people. But it was like, you're rocking a baby, or you're carrying food back and forth, or you're doing something. All of those motions provided what ended up being like really great rituals for exercise for people. So I think sometimes you're right. Like, we have all these prescriptions about what exercise needs to look like like, or what helps you to get movement in. And I think that your idea of, finding that medium of, how do you get some movement in while you're working, and deriving that from sort of the natural movements that you saw around you is really cool. So I like that story a lot. Could you talk a little bit about what research, you mentioned that you worked with a doctor and you found that this like 16-degree angle was the best angle. Could you talk some more about some of the research that has been done to support your product, or what led you to create the product and what kind of results you're seeing?
But, I think one of the first things for me is innovation is often found in pain points. And for me, it was my own personal pain point. Taking this corporate job led to a new experience that my body just told me it didn't like. And so I would love to say that we founded Fluid Stance on science and that this was going to make sense. But really, it was a theory, and it was a hypothesis that movement matters, and I feel better when I'm moving. And so I started just playing with things that I could find that would just establish that movement. And it was a couple of months into the process that Dr. Jeff Gray, who is a doctor that we utilized in the footwear world quite a bit in looking at analysis of how a foot changes with certain dynamics that we're putting in the shoes. And also Board to Run came out, which is a great book, and a lot of runners do. But we also started to look at the minimalist movement within footwear. And if we put too much cushion underneath someone's foot, we had found that they actually have a harder heel strike, which has more reverberation into your bones and joints. And so what we were trying to do is make people feel more comfortable with more cushion, but ultimately it was having a negative effect. And when I looked at the standing market, I saw all these mats out there, which were really, in essence, just putting more cushion underneath your foot, just like a shoe. And what I started to have a hypothesis was, by creating movement rather than this static cushion, the body would have more optimal movement. The body's designed to absorb impact in a movement. It's not designed to absorb impact in a stationary manner. And so I thought that this market was really tricking the consumer by putting more stepping comfort, as we use in the footwear world, but stepping comfort on a mat is really not ideal. So Dr. Gray really helped me look at how we can increase that optimal movement. We did a variety of different tests within his lab, looking at sensors on the knees, the ankles, and how we can create as much mobility in those joints that we could, and similar to what you see with walking. And so we experience about a 23 degrees of movement compared to what you would experience standing, and that's very similar to what you would experience walking. Now, you don't get the same cardiovascular benefit as walking. Walking is far superior, but you do have that range of motion, which is optimal. And Dr. Gray really helped us, and we found that some of our prototypes were taking that too far, as we talked earlier, but we found the sweet spot for us. And that was really important for us. And then throughout that process, we also had the opportunity to work with the Mayo Clinic and Dr. Levine, who really termed the sentence that sitting is the new smoking, really has worked on this neat concept. It's an acronym for non-exercise activity thrombosis, which essentially says, hey, everything doesn't have to be epic. We don't need that hour in the gym to be productive. And in fact, it's proven that if you sit for the rest of the day and just do an hour of gym, it's actually compromised. It's this non-exercise activity that really can have an accumulative effect. And so rather than saying, hey, you got to go on that 1 hour jog or anything, it's how do you take ordinary moments and really make them a little bit better. And so with our product, the Mayo Clinic found that we increased energy expenditure by 19.2% more than if you were sitting. Now, 19.2 isn't epic. And if you're on a run, you would be like, this is doing nothing to my heart rate. But the reality is, when you take that over the stretch of the day, you start to see a pretty big impact. And it was that research that really solidified what we were doing and what we set out. And then there's ancillary research that we found along the way. About 4 months in, we did our first user study and found we can increase somebody's ability to stand longer for an hour. And so I kind of likened us to the ranch dressing of the broccoli world, right? We just standing desks were great, but we made it taste better. And if we can help somebody stand an hour longer, that means they're not sitting. That means that we've actually increased energy expenditure more. But I think the fact that I'm most proud of is 83% of our users say they're happier at their desk on our product. And I could throw away all the caloric burn research that we had. And if I can just make somebody happier, then I've done my job. Now, the reality is if I could put that in a pill, I'd be a billionaire and we'd be done here. But the reality is the real activity takes some work, and that's what we're up to.
I love that. I love everything that you've said about the research, because I definitely try to add movement throughout my day, just from a anecdotal side of things. I know that just going to the gym once a day is really not going to help me, and I can feel that in my body as well. And obviously, there's a lot of research to support that. So I really appreciate the approach of trying to help people bring in a little bit of movement while not necessarily making them leave their desk space. So I think that's the big struggle that a lot of people have is you're working, you've got a lot to do, and if you want to add in movement, you might have to take a walk, right? You can stand or sit or go take a walk. But then if you take a walk, unless you're on a call, it's sometimes challenging to do that, to get away. But adding in some movement where you're able to continue to be productive, I think is very helpful. So from an employer perspective, I would love to know, have you heard anything from employers about how they feel about your product, or what they're seeing the results are on their employees?
I guess I can only anecdotally give that, and the companies that continue to buy from us is pretty strong, and we have a net promoter score in the marketing world. There's this NPS score, which is a 1 through 10. And if you're a promoter, you're a 9 and 10, meaning how likely are you to refer this on to a friend or a coworker? And our net promoter score is one of the highest I've seen. Like, an Apple sits in the low 70s, Nordstrom's is in the 70s. We commonly are sitting in a mid 80s. So I think the experience that you have, it's the simplicity of the design is what, in my opinion, makes Fluid Stance so beautiful. There's no motors, there's nothing. It's just an extension of your human desire to move. But one of the things that I think I've heard is just it has a little bit of magic in there, and the reality is that magic's just you. It's just a vehicle to have that further that expression. So I can't mention names here, but we have one firm that we work with that was getting ready to move into a new office and was relocating people, and their engineer said, hey, we're not moving in there till Fluid Stance is in. And so we got this urgent call, like, how can you get product for us? We need it for our new office. And so I guess there's no bigger statement than people's love for our product.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like it's really interesting because I'm a pacer. I constantly pace. So when I'm trying to learn something new, when I'm reading, when I'm, thinking through something, looking on my phone, when I'm on a call, whatever, I'm pacing. But in my office, it's small. There's no place for me to go. So it's frustrating to me that I can't walk back and forth. So I'm finding it really helpful to have a way to get movement in, because for me at least, it's more so that I'm just like fidgety. I have like energy that needs to go someplace. And so it's helpful for me to put it in a place that, is actually doing something for me, as opposed to like, just sitting on a call and maybe like talking more with my hands or something, which actually is what I'm doing right now. I'm talking with my hands. But I think it's good to refocus people on this idea that your movements during the day don't need to be something huge and crazy. You see everybody, and I'm not knocking it, but you see people like going to CrossFit or doing all these things. Like, it's like fitness has become this like exacerbating thing. And this idea of health and wellness has become like almost like a competition of who can be doing the craziest, most intense workouts. And I think that, while again, this is not a substitute for running or walking, something like that, but this idea that if you take advantage of those moments where you otherwise would be sedentary, you can make a big difference. I think that's a really strong message for our listeners to hear, because it can be intimidating sometimes to think about trying to get started in this kind of very like Instagram-y culture that we have, where everybody feels like they have to be doing something insane.
You bet. I mean, people ask me, what's the best ergonomic position ever? What's the best? And it's the next one, right? It's your body's desire to move to the next step, which creates circulation, which creates all those things. And the same thing's true if we're talking about product innovation or anything. And I like to use the model of 70-20-10, and that 70% of your time should be done doing what you need to be doing. So some of us write better when we're seated. Right. Don't feel guilty about that. I get confessions all the time. It's like, Joel, I'm a sitter. It's okay. Sitting's okay. It's just a matter of how you do some of the moderation within. So the 70-20-10 model, I think, really works well, is allow your people to do what they need to do in that 70% of the time to do the tasks that are the basics of the job. So email, strategic planning, writing, whatever. But the secret sauce is in the 20, in my opinion, because the 10 is true transformational work where you're go for a run, get in the pool, go on a hike, where you're spending that hour a day, if you will, going to do something where your cardio is at its highest. But it's this middle part, the 20%, we tend to ignore, and that's where you get organic extensions. You get the growth that's meaningful over time. It's not huge, you can't sweat for it, but it's that 20% investment that is what I would call hybrid movement, where you're taking ordinary movements, or what used to be ordinary movements, and just adding a little basic activity to it to increase. The Mayo Clinic would say it requires a 10% increase in energy expenditure. And that can be meetings, that can be thinking time, that could be on a product like ours where you're just doing email, where we do give you a 19% energy lift during email. I mean, who thought email could be productive? But I think we've done it. So I think it's that middle time where you see that ordinary moments turn into growth moments just through the introduction of non-exercise activity.
So in terms of, I totally agree that the non-exercise activity, I love this one 70-20-10 model, because I think it's something very tangible. People don't really think about how much time they need to spend doing this movement, and you've just given them something like that. To me is like, okay, well, I don't have to feel guilty for those moments that I'm sitting down and writing, like you said, because yes, I definitely write better when I'm seated, because I get into this zone, and I would, even just standing without any help, I would probably topple over at some point, because I'm not really focused on my physical space. Whether or not that's the best approach, that's just the way it is for me when it comes to writing. So knowing that, okay, if I take a big chunk of my day and I still have to sit here and there to get certain things done, but having that, being cognizant of that 20% that we really should be focusing on to get some additional movement to keep our bodies happy, because the healthier you are, the better your day's going to go. Honestly, you're healthy, you can actually get through your work, you're going to be more productive. We talk about it all the time on the podcast about the happy, healthy worker being more productive and being more satisfied and more likely to stay on the job. So having this tool, employers being able to provide something like this to allow their employees to get that physical movement in, to continue to be healthy and happy. And then from the employee perspective, being able to provide yourself some sort of tool to help you with that small movement throughout the day, I think is really going to make a big impact on productivity, employer and employee satisfaction overall. Have you seen any research, or have you guys done any research in terms of, I know you mentioned people are just happier in general. What about their perception of their employers, or how they feel just on the job in general?
We haven't done any specific research on that, but I would push back to the Net Promoter Score and looking at just the overall happiness. If you're willing to share a product with a friend, meaning that on a 1 to 10, you're giving it a 9 or 10. I'm not talking like a 6 or 7, but on a 9 to 10 perspective, I think the proof's in that. Mm-hmm. Perks are great. In this very competitive situation, I think you need to figure out how you can create an atmosphere that works for the right person. And I think it's in the day and age where we had a homogenized workplace where this is your desk, this is your chair, this is your workstation. The tension that I think is starting to create, and really you're starting to see brands like FluidStance come from it, is that employees are saying, no, I want my own personal space. I'm going to give you my mind. You're paying for my mind, but I get to keep my body. And one of the things that I saw out of the Human Performance Institute that's owned by Johnson & Johnson, one of the best things that I've seen is that they turn the conversation from health and really to energy. And if you had a machine that was working in your factory and it was slow because it didn't get oil the day before, you would address that. Well, the reality is, because it's a health question, we can't really have the health conversation with our employee because of the obvious protections that we'd want. But if we start to do a little 2 millimeter shift on that conversation and say, okay, it's not about health, it's actually about energy. And if my employees aren't sleeping well, if my employees aren't moving well, they don't have as much energy and they don't have the ability to have as much strain placed on them by the job or their family or whatever. And we got to deal with that. And so the moment that employers start to shift into looking at, okay, how do I optimize employees' energy level? Then you're going to look at the quality of food that they're eating. You're going to look at the quality of life that they're having. You're going to look at how their body's moving in and outside the office to optimize the amount of energy they have to give between 9 to 5. And the moment we shift on that, I think we're going to start to see productivity fly through the roof. And so that's really what Fluid Stance is about, is how do we personalize the workplace that works for that person, not everyone, because we aren't for everyone. A chair might be right for one person and movement might be right for the other. It's a matter of just giving that flexibility and the moderation that employees need to optimize their energy levels.
That's really cool. I mean, I'm thinking about what you're saying. And one of the things I'm wondering if you're facing a challenge with, because, you know, a lot of companies that are more forward thinking and more progressive in this area have been thinking about for a little while, you know, how do we address sort of these base needs that employees have? So, you know, you can't come into work sick and expect to be as productive as you would be if you weren't sick. And it doesn't, that's an extreme example, but it, you know, all these little things, not getting enough sleep or not eating properly, et cetera, make you a little bit less well than you would be otherwise. And it has the same impact on a different scale. But are you facing, or have you faced challenges in sort of making companies realize that their employees' health is important? I know in some of the consulting work that I've done, I've encountered companies that will say, you know, something to the effect of, well, when I was coming up through the ranks, we didn't have any of this, you know, fancy whatever. I just showed up to work and did my job and whatever. What do you say, or have you faced that? Or if you did face somebody saying that, what would you say to argue that, you know, people need to kind of get out of that and into a more modern way of thinking?
I think we have more data than we've ever had before. And the question is, how do we turn data into insight, right? There's this new product that I'm actually wearing today. It's called Whoop, and I'm working with a friend of mine that runs P3 in Santa Barbara, the Peak Performance Project. And what Whoop does is look at your ability to recover from strain. And they're looking at it purely from an elite athlete perspective, which I am far from. Where we're looking at is just the recreational athlete, understanding how much your body recovers overnight, how much, you know, space between heartbeats. There's so much data available to us between Fitbit, Whoop, all these products out there that we need to start to look at what affects somebody during the day is also being constructed at night. And the thing that's been the biggest learning for me out of Whoop is the importance of sleep. And, you know, as low as 5 years ago, I used to think sleep was for when I died and suck it up. Let's get it done. Who needs to sleep? You know, that was the mentality that I was raised with. That was the mentality that I had with my team. And the reality is the research is so persuasive that your ability to recover really impacts your ability to handle strain in the next day, to train if you're an elite athlete. Or, you know, Johnson & Johnson at the Human Performance Institute said, hey, we're all corporate athletes. Your ability to perform depends on your physical and mental capabilities. So I think that's what I would say is, if you think you're just hiring somebody for pure output, you need to look at their holistic self. And there's too much research that shows that what somebody had the night before in sleep, I mean, why people don't give us their employees the best mattresses in the world, it's probably the single easiest investment to increase productivity. And I guess I'm helping the mattress companies there, but you know, sleep's a big deal. Movement's a big deal. It's all these intangibles that we're coming to realize that really ultimately impacts the output of an employee over the day.
Do you know of any companies
Definitely.
that give people mattresses? I'm curious
But
about
let's
that.
start one.
Yeah, that's a good idea, right?
The mattress today. Why don't we just go ahead and start one, right? No,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I mean, but whether it's unlimited time off or freezing your eggs, I mean, it's a matter of how do you start to take care of people. That is our responsibility. Is if you want the most productivity out of people, how do you make their life as holistic as possible to do their best?
I think a lot of what we talk about on the podcast and in our articles very much aligns to what you're saying, and it's really interesting to hear about it from the physical perspective because we talk about it from a psychological perspective and, how do you recover from stress? How do you deal with strain? What are the types of activities that you can do to help you kind of re-energize and fill your cup, if you will,
Mm.
before you have to go back into work. And if you depleted your psychological resources, then you're going to have a lot of difficulty putting in the focus and the energy needed in the workplace. And the same clearly applies from the physical perspective. So I think that everything that you've said is very much aligned to all the research that we know and love and hold dear to our hearts, just from a slightly different
It's pretty
view.
funny. You guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never seen a mind just sitting in an office, right? There's this whole other vessel that comes with it, right? And so
Hmm.
the, we can't ignore either. And we can't ignore the physical side. We can't ignore the mental side. And the moment that we start to look at, I mean, it's easy for us to talk about marketing with Simon Sinek. It's not the what, it's the why. And, we as brand champions pound about how we are great at this emotional connection with our consumer. Where is that emotional connection with our employee, and what motivates them functionally, technically, but most importantly, emotionally? And when you start to hit the level in that stratosphere, employees will start to go way beyond reason and be loyal to you more than you can and more productive than we could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's a combination of everything, right? Like you need to ensure that your workplace is a good positive work environment from, having good managers that support you and coworkers, not having toxicity in terms of the way people treat each other, being able to manage your workload around your life, your personal life as well, and then the physical component comes into play here too. So it's really thinking about people, like you said earlier, holistically. And so your employees are people, and the whole person matters to have them be the most effective and the most satisfied, happiest, etc. employee. So employers really need to be thinking about people that way. And I think there's some organizations that are starting to,
Mm.
and then I think there's some that are a little bit behind.
I mean, just think of all the expense reports that are approved over the time and how many client functions with how many hundreds of dollars of alcohol on the tab. And then if you saw somebody's expense report come through with hiking shoes, which one do you think would get approved in most situations? Obviously it's the dinner because that's the old school way. But, how do we start to increase the movement of our employees and how that impact it? So I'm
Yeah.
all in.
Yeah, that's a great idea too. I mean, I think that we can also start to think about and expanding the ways in which people meet and generate ideas and have meetings and where they go and what they do. I have a friend of mine who she has walking meetings with people. She'll say, meet me at such and such park, track, whatever, and instead of meeting at a coffee shop or meeting in an office, they'll walk around the track and talk for a while and then go back to the office. So I think you're right. This expansiveness in terms of thinking about how do we think more broadly about how we do business. And one of those ways that we can think about doing that is by investing in things that help us to move the needle forward and allowing our employees to get some more of that movement and take care of their physical, emotional selves at work. So I think that's really awesome. So obviously everybody should have one of your decks. We really like them. But if people don't, have one right now, or maybe they don't have the budget for one just yet, what are some other kind of practical applications that might stem from the research that you've done that you might recommend people do just to take little steps towards getting that movement?
I'm a big believer that balance is the great differentiator. And a lot of people misconstrue that as work-life balance and things have to be 50-50 and it's like a scale, it's equal. The reality is it's not. It's in this day and age with technology where it's at is you have to have dynamic balance. And that means going back to that formula 70-20-10 is you have to have the extremes to outweigh just kind of that big chunk of what you have to do. And so there are some little places. If you simply brush your teeth on one foot, your balance is going to get better. It's a use it or lose it situation. And the more we're sitting in a flat world, so a chair or all the flat carpeting we have in corporate America, the whole world has taken any risk out to the point that we no longer experience the natural instability that our life needs and that our body needs to have a balanced vestibular system, which allows us to learn better, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see it in the research with kids. The more PE we're taking out, the more ADHD problems are being had. It's not just pure energy. It's just that their system no longer can handle it. And so where you can find just ordinary movements, taking the stairs versus the elevator, it's a no-brainer. There's just little stuff like that are ordinary moments of movement that are possible that can create great change. And we all brush our teeth, hopefully twice a day. Go to 1 foot. It's 2 extra minutes in the day that your body has to be out of balance, and it'll ultimately seek balance through that instability.
That's really good recommendation. I like that one. Very specific in terms of how to get started, and then maybe adding some more of that. And I think your body also adapts to, your balance will get better, and then you might say, okay, well, what's the next challenge? And try to keep pushing yourself. I know I tend to overestimate my physical capabilities, but one good part of that is that your body actually does it adapts to what you ask it to do under many circumstances. So when I was first starting to do yoga, the only time that worked for my schedule was an advanced Ashtanga class. And I thought like, yeah, sure, I can do advanced, whatever. And I showed up and it was super duper hard and I almost dropped out of it. And the instructor encouraged me to stay with it. I really did. I surprised myself with what I was able to do by just exposing myself to that, trying something new, trying something different. So it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but doing these little things that maybe you hadn't thought about, taking advantage of those moments and giving yourself that challenge and then moving forward with it. I'm on board with that. I think it could make a huge difference.
And I think it really has to come from a top-down level too, because I think people need permission for movement. And I'm sorry to harken on alcohol. I drink, so I don't know why I'm being so hard on it. But it's easy for us to say, "Hey, let's go to the bar and get a drink." But it's really weird when somebody says, "Hey, let's go out and go for a walk." It's just a matter of changing that observation of what movement can mean in a culture of a business. And I think when that starts to happen top down, it gives people permission to. Why is the boss's parking spot so close? What if his spot was all the way out? And how many extra steps do you really need to make change in your life? The research says not a lot. So let's stop fighting for the closest parking lot. Let's give employee of the month about a mile away from the front door and see how much better they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think to your point with the balance and the brushing your teeth and all those little things, you can do those on your own, and then the leadership really needs to model it in the workplace. I think everything that has to do with culture at work really does help if it's driven from the top down. So showing that you as a leader are also committed to these types of habits and changes kind of inspires everyone else to do it. And I think you're right. I think it's weirder to ask someone to take a walk with you than to go to happy hour or, grab a drink or coffee. But we can change that, and maybe you can't change it in the whole country, but we could change that within your own organization. So if you start to do it regardless of level and start asking people to take walks with you after work or whatever other activity it might be, depending on, where you are. If it's snowing, I'm not walking outside with you. No way. But but I think that there's a lot that people can do just within their own teams and groups and slowly start to grow that. So it might feel weird at first, but you can start a movement if you do it regardless of your level.
A movement.
There you go. There's a lot of hallways in corporate America. So I think we got some miles to walk, whether you're in Minneapolis or Santa Barbara.
For sure.
True. I guess that's true. I fear the cold, which is why I'm in California. But I I just imagine right now, Katina was talking about the weather earlier, and I just can't imagine going outside. But yes, walk the hallways
Yeah.
or find another place to walk.
Yeah, when Patricia was in grad school, she wore a parka. I'll always remember like the very first day in State College, Pennsylvania, that it was like 60 degrees. She came in a parka and I was like, "Oh no. This is not going to be good for you." It's going to get way
Yeah.
colder than this.
And I definitely found my way back home.
Yeah.
So.
So thank you so much for sharing all of this awesome insight and really cool information about ways that people can incorporate more movement into their daily lives and make a difference in their work and their attitudes. Is there anything else that you want our listeners to know before we end with a final fun question? Or I guess we think it's fun. We'll see if you think it's fun.
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be as epic as we all make it out to be. And it's just these really ordinary moments in a 2 millimeter shift of how you look at email or how you look at brushing your teeth, and that there are simple ways to make change. And there are simple products out there. There are even ways to do it without products. So I hope people just make that first step towards change and not say that you have to get to the gym for an hour or we need to build a facility in our offices to make that change. I think it's a matter of just meeting people where they are and introducing natural movement back into the workspace.
Completely agree. I think that's a great point. Just keeping it small. Don't freak out. Don't try to make it too big, and you'll get there. So our final fun question is: what is one health and wellness fad you tried but absolutely hated?
Oh man, I know this one exactly. I had been on the road for what felt like forever. Forgot what my kids and my wife looked like. And I was sitting in a hotel and it was like midnight and I'd just been at this big meal, one of those big steak client meals. And I'm sitting there and watching TV and I'm like, I should be asleep, but on comes P90X. And I was like, oh man, I could do that. I could be back in that shape. And P90X, I ordered it. It was at home, but I got it. I had to install a pull-up bar. And so I was drilling in the garage roof and I hit a knot with my drill, throws out my shoulder, totally tore my bicep tendon. I didn't do one day of P90X, but I got hurt by it.
Oh no.
Oh my gosh.
I know people have had a ton of success with it, but I was on the bench before I got to start the game. So there is no quick fix. So
yeah, whenever you have to install equipment into your house for a workout program, it's a little that's a little too much for me. I actually did Insanity, which is no equipment, but it's crazy, kind of like P90X. And yeah, I did it. I don't think I'd do it again. But I did not harm myself in that way. So I can see why you did not like that.
Well, for all those listeners out there, maybe be careful if you're trying to install any equipment for your workouts in the future.
Yeah.
Let's start with the ordinary moments, right? Let's start with the basics.
Yes. Start with balancing on one foot while you're brushing your teeth and walking around and bringing in that movement. And then
there's a reason you didn't put a motor in the boards here, because lowest possibility of physical danger possible.
You found me out.
True. No installation required. Very helpful. Well, thank you again, Joel, so much for joining us today. We really appreciated your time and talking about FluidStance and the physical movement that you've discovered to be so helpful and so beneficial for so many employees out there. And we really appreciate your time, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks you guys very much for having me on.
Thanks again to Joel for joining us today for our interview with FluidStance founder. He was so fascinating. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you want to learn more about FluidStance, you can find them on their website. It's fluidstance.com. It's also linked in our show notes. And if you want to hear more about Worker Being, our website is workerbeing.com. You can also follow us on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook at Worker Being. And of course, we'd love for you to reach out if you have any questions or comments or feedback. You can find us at workerbeing@gmail.com. Thank you. Worker Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.